a lot of the things that we believe about God come from the human relationships we've experienced and the things that we've come to believe about the humans in our life. And then we're either allowing God to make up for all of the lack that we've experienced in our human relationships. And so we be like, oh, I haven't gotten this from many people, so I'll get it from God. But then the moment it seems like we're not getting it from God or that it's not being delivered, then there's just a crushing blow of, if God can't give it to me, who can? Or the other way of, this is the way all my people are, this must be the way God is. If we didn't have people who are available to us, it's awfully hard to believe that God is available to us. And if people didn't help us when we were in distress, and if our distress didn't get alleviated and we just sat in our discomfort and no one was with us, then why would we believe that God is going to be with us when we're in that place?
If there was one practice that you would recommend people to do again and again to help rewire or to help create that secure attachment?
The one that I think is foundational, no matter which landscape you're living in, is...
Hey everybody, welcome to the Inherent Identity podcast. Today I have a special guest and her name is Cyd Holsclaw. And she, although she won't admit it, I call her an attachment theory expert. She has a number of certifications, has learned all about this, has done a lot of curating around this topic, which is why I call her an expert. The thing about attachment theory, if you haven't heard of it, it's a psychological framework. It's an understanding of how relationships are formed, even as infants, even when you're in the womb. And I have done a little bit of research and study on my own about this topic, but not nearly enough as Cyd. And what she talks about, I want to highlight the 3 questions that she's going to talk more in depth about, but I wanted to share them here with you so that you can kind of write them down and just through the repetition, be able to see how these 3 questions play out, not only in your current relationships, but how they played out when you were little as a young kid, and how they play out in your relationship with God and with other people. Because these 3 relationships, they're all connected. And if you're lacking in one, it's going to impact the other 2. So the 3 questions, and I wrote them down. One is, are they available? So is someone available to you? And not just available in the sense of they're physically present, but that they can care for you, that they can attend to your needs, both emotionally and physically. And then the second question that, especially as an infant, that we're asking is that when we're in a stressful situation, will this stress be alleviated? We're constantly looking around, wondering and asking ourselves, okay, who can I go to? And will my parent come in to rescue me or to support me in this stressful situation? And then the third question is this: what do I actually have power over? Like, where can I use my agency? Where can I explore? What can I do? Now, if you want to dive deeper into what Cyd is going to be talking about, I'm going to be putting some links in the description of this episode that will link to some programs that she is going to be running pretty soon. And so you'll want to check out the things that she's doing. Her and her husband actually wrote a book on attachment theory and relating it to God and a relationship with him. And so I can't think of anyone better to recommend you to in terms of really understanding this way of connecting to God. So we're going to get into the conversation, and it's going to come in right into that first question that I talked about, which is, are they available? So you can listen to my conversation with Cyd Holsclaw, and I hope you enjoy.
You know, the first question we're asking is, are there people that are available to me? Which is all about others, right? How are others in this world? And are they there for me? Is there relationship? Is there availability? Is there connection? And then the way we answer that question, whether it's yes, there are definitely people available to me, or maybe sometimes people are available, sometimes they're not. Or no, people are not available, I'm on my own. that affects the whole way that our nervous systems become shaped and formed as we grow. And then second question being, will this distress be alleviated that I'm feeling right now, this discomfort, which is wet diapers, hungry bellies, whatever the discomfort is. And if that's tended to rapidly, we begin to have this pattern of distress goes away. It doesn't last forever. And that's very much about what the world is like. And then the last one of, what do I actually have any power over, or what can I use my power for? That's about who am I and what is my realm of influence in the world. And then all of those defaults that we embed in our bodies early on then affect our relationship with God, right? If we didn't have people who are available to us, it's awfully hard to believe that God is available to us. And if people didn't help us when we were in distress, and if our distress didn't get alleviated and we just sat in our discomfort and no one was with us, then why would we believe that God is going to be with us when we're in that place? And then that all the power I have in the world is used to protect myself, because that's all I can do, because I'm trying to connect with people, but they're not connected with me. And getting to that point where like all the power I use is just to keep myself safe, which is a protection system. You can't connect with other people when you're living out of protection, but then we try to pray, but our whole nervous system is saying you're under threat right now. No wonder we can't hear from God. And then we get upset with ourselves and we pour shame on ourselves because what's wrong with me that I can't connect with God? Everyone else can connect with God. What's wrong with me? Either that or everyone else can connect with God, but clearly he doesn't give a rip about me. So what's the point? Yeah. Just the incredible pain that's there, which is just coming from the survival strategies we learned when we were young. We just don't realize that we're using those when we're approaching conversation with God, and it's heartbreaking.
It's one thing to experience a block and even to know that, okay, my nervous system is part of the problem here. But we just so easily go to the place of shame, so easily to the place of there's something wrong with me because it's not working like I think it should with other people. And that's one other element that I think comes into play is just expectations. We learn a way of receiving, we learn a way of prayer. And if it doesn't look like the scriptures, if it doesn't look like the person that I value and that I see as an example of who I want to be, if it doesn't look like him or her, then I must be doing it wrong. And we can't quite differentiate the difference between doing something wrong and being wrong. And so it just becomes an identity statement of I am flawed. There's something wrong with me. When you work with people, are there things that you like to help people understand so that they can get through the blocks?
Yeah. First of all, I like for people to understand that there's no rush. That as uncomfortable as it is, things don't happen according to the timelines we would prefer. And so just the grace at the very beginning of the process of the good news is change and transformation is absolutely a possibility and a reality. And I believe it's going to happen for you. And it probably won't go as fast as you would like it to. And so the sort of good news, bad news kind of thing. And just reminding people along the way, like it's so important to celebrate the small shifts and the small changes, because if you don't celebrate those, all you can see is the lack or the gap between where you want to be and where you are, which then when you're constantly looking at the gap and how you're falling short, it doesn't motivate you to continue on or to give you any sense of hope. But celebrating those small things is just so crucial to continuing to want to do the process. And so that first and foremost, and then I always want to check for theological things that get in the way. And that's not usually the first thing, but it's just something I'm listening for along the way.
Yeah.
That understanding of God is distant, he's far away, he doesn't want personal relationship. That's underneath it all. That's something that somebody probably taught you at some point in time and then was confirmed by your experience. It wasn't necessarily something you came to on your own. And so just paying attention to where do we learn these things and knowing that those are things that we were probably taught, that just because we were taught them, and they don't have to be the only way to understand how God is.
Is that something that you just ask, hey, what do you believe about God?
No, I just listen for it. You can hear it when people are talking about their life and their frustration with God and how they're experiencing their daily. And then I might ask questions like, how do you imagine God like experiences that when that happens in your life?
Mm.
And when people are like, what? God doesn't experience what are you talking about? Why would God experience
Mm.
something in my life? And then knowing, okay, there's a disconnect here where
Yeah.
there is a truth in the person's mind that God does not get involved in my life in a way that would affect him.
Mm.
And it's a big shift, but I fully believe that's the case, that our gratitude has an impact on God. Just if I were to say, start gushing with gratitude for you, Tyson, for all the things that you
Mm.
do, for the specific like articulations of things I'm grateful for, something would happen for you. You would experience that.
Yeah.
But we so often will give God gratitude or say thank you in a rote kind of way without doing that second step of what is that like for you when I say thank you? And I'm a parent
Mm.
of young adult men now. And I know those times that were so meaningful to me when they would just stop in the middle of, I didn't ask for it. I didn't tell them they had to say thank you, but just those moments of spontaneous turning toward me and being like, Mom, I am so grateful for this, or the way that you've done this, or the way that this has impacted me because of your input or your contribution or whatever. And just those moments are so sweet and precious and tender for me.
Mm.
That's only a glimmer of what it's like for God when we turn to him and say thank you and express appreciation in a specific way. And that's not the way I grew up. I didn't grow up with an
Yeah.
understanding of God being deeply affected by my
Mm.
interactions with him. And just the sadness that I think and I've had lots of, I think you've interviewed people who do Emmanuel approach, right? And so just the interactions I've had with Jesus, where he has re-narrated stories in my life and showed me what it was like for him to be in those places with me and for me to feel
Mm.
like I was all alone, and the grief that brought him, that he knew I was feeling all alone and that I couldn't perceive that he was there with me, and just his longing for me to know and for me to be able to see that, and the sadness at what someone else might be doing in that story. And even he's shown me a couple times where he was trying to get someone's attention, but they weren't aware and he couldn't get their attention. So they carried on in what was going on when his desire
Mm.
was to say, hey, notice, notice me, notice what you're doing, notice what's happening here. But the person was probably living in protection mode. Like, I'm just on autopilot,
Yeah.
I'm doing the thing. And so just that whole like theological foundation of Emmanuel, God with us, means he really wants to be with us. God really is willing and capable and happy to be present in a very personal kind of way in our lives. And that's a theology that a lot of us don't grow up with and just don't understand. And then when we read the
Yeah.
Bible that way, it changes the way you read everything. And then that invitation along with that of not only am I with you, but I want you to join in with what I'm doing in the world. Come and partner with me. Like, be part of my family business. And just that, oh, lacking significance. I'm doing the most significant work there is. I'm joining God in flourishing life in all the world. And so those kinds of things I'm always listening for as people are talking about their life, and they're revealing how they view God and how they believe God feels about them. And so just
Mm.
being able to ask questions along the way about that. And then that always leads into the defaults we live from, because a lot of the things that we believe about God come from the human relationships we've experienced and the things that we've come to believe about the humans in our life. And then
Mm.
we're either allowing God to make up for all of the lack that we've experienced in our human
Mm.
relationships. And so we be like, oh, I haven't gotten this from many people, so I'll get it from God. But then the moment it seems like we're not getting it from God, or that it's not being delivered, then there's just a crushing blow of, if God can't give it to me, who can? Or the other way of, this is the way all my people are, this must be the way God is. So it's just that. And both of those, I think, lead to a deconstructing, reconstructing kind of process where you have to come to terms with God won't be defined in the ways that you want so easily for him to fit into. There's always uniqueness, always he's revealing that he's not contained in the ways that we think.
Are there ways that you address these default beliefs as they come up?
Yeah. So my husband and I we've just written a book on attaching to God and the way it and doesn't come out till August, but we're really excited for it. And we do a 6-week attaching to God cohort where we try to work through, how did God design attachment to work in our family relationships when we're born? And how does that reflect his design for all of creation and how he longs to be attached with us? And then how does that go wrong because of all of the brokenness in the world? And how do we compensate for what we're missing through all these survival strategies? And then those survival strategies are what form that default that's just wired into us. And it's what we behave from because it's our reality. It's the window through which we see the whole world. And so understanding the reason that we developed those defaults is because as little kids, we're like little scientists. We're running experiments constantly and figuring out what do we get back when we put something out into the world, what comes back at us. And that can be as simple as crying. Does somebody respond to my cries? It can be like the toddlers that are eating in a high chair tray and shoving things off the tray and seeing what happens. It's playing games of peekaboo. It's all kinds of stuff. And then as we get older, the experiments become a little bit more complex. What happens when I express a big emotion? What happens when I disagree? What happens when I speak up for myself? What happens when I get angry? And we don't think we're scientists. We don't realize we're doing it, but we're constantly collecting that data and storing it and going, okay, based on everything I've experienced and everything I've lived, this is how the world works. And starting with, this is how God designed the world to work. This is how the world works now because of the brokenness. And then you've got your own perception of how the world works. And a lot of the conflict that comes up for you in relationship with other people is that you're looking through different windows. You're living in different landscapes, is how we talk about it. You're living in a different landscape and different things are needed in those landscapes. So if you're surviving in the desert, you need very different equipment, very different resources, very different ways of moving and being than you would if you're surviving in a jungle. And then you're coming at someone, assuming they're living in a desert too, but they're living in a jungle. And so the tool that you're pulling out is I'm going to conserve all of my energy so that I can get through the heat of the day. And water is scarce. So I'm only going to have a little bit. I'm going to be I'm going to conserve my energy. Whereas like someone who's living from a different landscape has got a machete and they're just like, I have to kill everything. Everything has to get out of the way. Everything is about to kill me. And then you put those people together in a relationship and you're like, why do we not understand each other? And so helping people see what landscape are you living from and what survival tools have you collected based on the experiments you've run? And how could you be invited into the pasture with the good shepherd where you lack no good thing? And the water that you need, the grass is there, the shepherd is with you in the valley of the shadow of death. You already are on your way and already getting glimpses of dwelling in the house of the Lord forever. How do you run new experiments based on that? If you're willing to look at the life of Jesus and how Jesus lived that relationship with the Father and the Spirit, and then how Jesus is not only our model for secure attachment with God, he's also our attachment figure that we can securely attach to. And so seeing that as we form new relationship with Jesus, we can start noticing, how is this new experiment that I'm running with Jesus and this new way that now that I understand that these are the defaults I operate from, now that I understand that's the way I'm seeing the world, can I also be willing to see that's actually not the way God designed it to be? And he has great compassion to meet me where I am in it, but he also longs to bring me into the pasture. And so how can I develop practices and do some things? Because practice is what makes the change. It's embedded in your nervous system. So just learning it isn't the same thing as actually rewiring your brain through the repetition over time and the practice. And so offering practices that we can do to help us take advantage of that neuroplasticity that God designed in us, that we can actually change the way we're wired so that we can get closer to living in that good pasture, the good shepherd pasture.
Yeah. If there was one practice that you would recommend people to do again and again to help rewire or to help create that secure attachment, is there one that you think is
Yeah,
the
I
most
think my
important, you know?
favorite, the one that I think is foundational, no matter which
Yeah.
landscape you're living in, is the foundation that God created for us, which is that foundation of joy, the joyful connection, which is Jim Wilder talks about joy as the experience of being with someone who's glad to be with you. And that's the beginning of an attachment relationship too. When a baby is born, hopefully they're greeted with joy by the parent who's been expectantly waiting for them for all this time.
Yeah.
And when a baby is born, they're greeted with, "Oh, you're here. Like, I'm so glad you're here." And so it's that gladness to be with that is the first moments of our, that are at least designed to be the first waking moment of our life, is to see a face that's glad to see us, glad to be with us. And so probably one of the most foundational things we can do to try to restore or to rebuild secure attachment is to really focus on joy. And so anytime you experience anyone being even remotely glad to see you, latching onto that, savoring it, and then tucking it away and saying, this is something I can come back to anytime I want. And then if you're by yourself, practicing that, oh, I remember when I walked into my friend's house and she came around the corner, wiping her hands on a towel and opened her arms for a big hug and said, "I'm so glad to see you." I can relive that moment and I can notice what that does in my body to be received like that, to be welcomed like that. And even if it's not from a person, even like sometimes people don't have a person that they can remember that happening with, but was there ever a dog? Dogs are so good at expressing joy with their tails wagging furiously and "Oh, you came to see me. You're my favorite person in the world ever. I've never met you before, but I love you." And so even just recalling that, of what was it like to be greeted by a dog? And even if there's not that, if you don't have a memory of that, even just going to a place, any place, even if it was only for a second, of like, things feel good and right in the world right now, and I feel safe. And to see if you can pull that moment back in all of its richness, all of the five senses, and then say, this is a gift to me from the God who is glad to be with me, and trying to just map that reality onto that memory, even though it wasn't part of your thought process in that memory. And so just recalling those moments of joy, talking about moments of joy, right? Sharing it with someone else. If I told you about a recent experience I had when someone was glad to be with me, or if we've ever experienced that with God too, just remembering God's gladness to be with us. Because rehearsing those and storing those up and sharing them with other people and remembering them for ourselves. First of all, in our brains, they've done magnetic resonance imaging that shows when you recall something, you're experiencing the same things you were when it happened. And so if you're remembering eating ice cream, your taste centers, like all of that stuff is activated in your brain, and you're not even anywhere near ice cream. And so just the fact that you can continually like reignite and re-experience those joyful moments, and that will increase your capacity. I think it's Jim Wilder who talks about this too, but since your podcast is so centered on identity and joy are like experienced in the same part of the brain. And so a very low joy experience also means a very sort of weak understanding of who I am. And the higher joy, the more joy we've experienced, the stronger our sense of I am loved, I am welcomed, I am me. Like we have a better understanding of me, of myself. And that's going to be richer and stronger. And it's going to be clearer to us where I end and where others begin, and what I actually enjoy and what I don't. And so that experience of enmeshment, or that experience of like avoidance, needing to avoid it, like it allows us to remain ourselves.
Right. Kind of builds that foundation of identity. Because I don't think that if we don't have that, it's hard for me to act out who God says I am in any additional way.
Absolutely.
Of what God has invited us into, or invited me into in all that you've curated, are there things that you personally practice that you keep coming back to and that really enrich your life and relationship with Christ?
Yeah, that's such a great question. Yes, I definitely
Yes.
try to practice joy as much as I can. I don't always remember, I'll be honest, right? You're like,
Yeah.
when you get to a place of feeling stronger and the need is not as present, then I don't always remember to continually do that. But yeah, I practice joy. I really savor experiences of joy throughout my day and in my life. I read scripture imaginatively. So I do a lot of imaginative readings like Ignatius of Loyola. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he has the whole spiritual exercises, and he asks you to put yourself in the narrative and pull up all your five senses. What would you be smelling and feeling, and what would the air feel like? All of that as you're in a narrative. And then
Mm.
observing, where am I in this picture? How close am I to what's going on? How am I experiencing Jesus? If it's a narrative of Jesus, right? How am I experiencing Jesus? How is Jesus aware of me in this narrative? What's going on between us, which is a very relational way of reading. What would it have been like if I had been there? Kind of question. So I do that. I do a lot of recalling of just ways that God has been there for me. So I like to start my prayer times every morning with recalling ways that God has made himself available to me, ways I try to run through all three defaults. So ways that he's made himself available to me, ways that he has alleviated distress in my life, even if it wasn't in the
Mm.
timeline I asked for. And then also looking at ways that he has given me the freedom to be an agent in my own life. Like he doesn't
Mm.
coerce or force, but he allows me the freedom to choose. And then what is he inviting me to use my agency for today? So those are kinds of things that I'm trying to like keep in front of myself on a daily basis, which is just continuing to secure those attachment defaults. So those are some of the ones that I'm currently practicing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say I
Yeah.
am a seasonal spiritual disciplines type person. So I'm not like the
Yeah.
slow and steady, do the same thing every day for 40 years, as much as I'm like, this is the season we're in right now. And then I feel a
Yeah.
shift. We're going to do something different for a season. And I love that God loves that about me. And I love that
Yeah.
he's not wagging a finger going, you don't sit down and do it the same way every day. You have no consistency, but instead he's just, I am delighted that we're together and we don't have to do the
Mhm.
same thing all the time.
You mentioned that there's those defaults, and you touched on this a little bit, but I think it's important to highlight what each of these defaults are.
Yeah.
And I guess I see in my mind how the way I show up today, it harkens back to the way I felt relationship in the past,
Mhm.
and whether I received those things that you mentioned. And I don't know, I guess it would be neat to explore, how do I know I am deprived of one of those?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like,
It's a,
in what ways am I going to be like showing up in the world that is a red flag to me to say, you should probably work on this or that or this?
oh, there's so much we could do. There's so many things we could talk about. It's, yeah.
Maybe a best way to go about this, is there one that you find maybe is a pattern that people have more often than not? Or say there's lots of people that struggle with all sorts of addictions, whether it's overeating, whether it's pornography, whether it's whatever. And is there one of those defaults that's more commonly linked to that?
So the way that we talk about it in our book and in the Attaching to God cohort is like, the answer to that first question is someone available to me. If that answer is a maybe, you're going to be more prone to use all of your agency, right? All of your power to check on your relationships, to keep people close, to always make sure that the other people in your life are feeling good about you. There's a lot of anxiety around how are my people and how are we connected and how is everything going? And if someone's upset with me, it is not okay. And that would be because I'm living from a maybe from that is someone available to me question, right? If it's more like a no, like no, people are not available to me, then you're going to be more prone to really enjoy spending time by yourself, to do a lot of things that are pretty independent, to be less concerned if people are upset with you, or if people are upset with you, you're going to assume it's them, it's their fault. It's not because there's anything going on with you. It's just because it's them. And that's more of, it's the avoidance, right? It's, I just avoid relationship because I assume people aren't available. And so those are ways that you can start picking up on, like, maybe just asking yourself the question, when someone that I care about is upset with me, how does that affect me? Do I feel like I have to scramble and I cannot rest until we're okay? Or am I more, they'll come around. I don't need to worry about it. Or they're upset with me, so I'm just going to avoid being around them or talking it through because it's really hard for me to enter into that. And that would be just an indicator just for that first default. And those kinds of things, pain from either one of those kinds of things are the kinds of things that lead us into self-soothing addictions, lead us into all kinds of behaviors because we think we're getting what we need, or we're working at trying to make the pain go away or feel better. And so, to just say if someone has an addiction, what does that mean about their defaults? It's more like we all use coping mechanisms to try to deal with the answer that we have to that question of whether people are available or not. And it's going to exhibit differently for different people, but that's the most basic question that I think we can ask ourselves is, do I have a sense that the people in my life are really truly there for all of me? Like they can see all of me, not just the parts of me that I know they approve of, or the parts of me that I know that they like. But what if I could show my whole self to this person? Do I trust that they would still be there for me? And for most of us, that answer is not going to be a solid yes. And that's just real. And so even just that, there's nothing wrong with you if your answer is a maybe or a no. It's actually way more common than it being a solid yes. And so almost all of us have work to do around that question, because we do live in a world that is not the way that God would love, the way that God originally designed it to be. We would all know that. But even when Adam and Eve knew that, they still weren't able to be content in it. And right?
Yeah. And I think you touched on this a little bit, but what does it mean to be available?
Right.
What goes into that? Because I might be available for someone, like physically available, but I don't think that's the whole picture.
Yeah, it's not the whole picture. No. Wouldn't that be great if it was? Then like every single parent who's ever with their child ever anywhere near them would be providing availability. But no, that's not.
Right.
Yeah, availability is more about like attunement. Like I am attuned to you and I am available to you in a way that is emotionally attuned, like physically and emotionally attuned. So if you desperately need a hug, I know that I need to hug you even before you ask. That's availability, right? Or I can see that you are really upset and I move towards you and I just say, can I do anything? Like I just offer, I can tell you're upset. What can I do? That's attunement. Now, we only live attuned lives, even at our best, about 30% of the time. So 30% of the time is hugely successful attunement. And so then that brings in this whole dynamic of we're constantly dealing with ruptured relationships because we're misattuned to each other. But then we're always engaging in that repair work of, I am so sorry. I was clueless. I was not tuned in to how upset you were. And I just blew it. I tried to fix you instead of being present and available to you. I'm so sorry. Will you forgive me? Repair, right? And when those repairs are made, the relationship gets stronger because that's how you gain even more confidence. If I show up with my whole self, even if it gets broken, this person is going to repair. I know that this relationship is with someone who wants to repair the things that get ruptured. It's not someone who's just going to be like, oh, that was a mess. Oh, we'll never talk about that again. That's not repair.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's that whole process that builds the attachment. If we're attuned with God 30% of the time, that is phenomenal.
Yeah.
And so even just that understanding, and then where there are times of just like, oh, God, I haven't been connected with you in a bit. God wants to repair that. He's never going to be like, oh, now I'm upset with you. Like, it's been too long. We can't connect now.
Yeah.
Instead, he's, of course, I'm still here for you. Yeah, you neglected me for a while. I'm still here for you. That hasn't changed. And so that he's always repairing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was going to ask, is like, how do you think God goes about repairing our relationships with him?
By never, ever turning away, by always running to greet us like the father in the prodigal. Like it's that there's just always available, always open, always ready to receive us back. I think that, and he's making all things new. He's repairing the whole world. If you look at the life of Jesus on earth, everything he's doing is repairing ruptures. He's repairing bodies that are broken. He's repairing hearts that are wounded. He's repairing shame that is crushing. He's repairing people's lives. He's repairing humanity. And he's repairing the right relationship that humanity has with God. That's what he's doing. And then he's even repairing death. And then we have this vision of what eternity will be, and all of the ruptures will be repaired. Everything will be made right. Everything will be restored. And in the in-between time, we're just seeing repairs some of the time, and some of the time things go unrepaired because it takes consent and participation for those repairs. And we don't always see it. We don't always want to participate in it. And then just world perspective, the world is in need of repair. And that final repair doesn't come until the fulfillment of all things. Yeah, I think God is always interested in repairing the ruptures. It's us that need to be convinced.
Yeah. It goes back to what you're saying. You were saying about trying to understand the relationship that they might have with God. Because if I don't believe in a God that wants to repair, then that's a problem.
Right.
Like we can't repair a relationship if I don't believe in a God that wants to repair it.
And that's especially hard to believe if you've had a human relationship where a parent kept track of everything you ever did. And when you did one more thing, it was just like, you always blah, blah, blah. You've done, or like always throwing things back in your face that happened before. That's not going to give you a belief that there's repair available. It's more, I can't go to God now because his list is too long. He's got this long list against me now. And if that's your frame, then of course you're not going to talk to God. And that makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah.
It's actually wise to prevent yourself from more pain, right? And so it's just, I think I just want to like just speak grace to people. Like, you're doing the things that you think are going to help you stay safe. And it takes a tremendous amount of courage to start to consider that God may not be the way that you've always thought he was. And I guess I just always want to be the kind of person that can help give people courage to start opening up to the possibility. It's the center of my heart right now, is wanting people to have a more secure relationship with God.
Yeah. And you talk about it so beautifully. And I think it is an avenue that I have yet to really research in depth, the whole attachment theory.
Yeah.
And so I think the way that you talked about it, really, it kind of paints the broad stroke that I think is really important in the relationships with God, with ourselves, with other people. Would there be any other questions that you think would be helpful to reflect on? Because the question you offered earlier of, is God available, or is availability there? I'm curious as to what other kinds of questions would help to link to those defaults so that we can start like digesting that a little bit.
Yeah, I think another one, the second one is, will this distress be alleviated? And so even just looking at when I am in distress, how do I picture getting out of that distress. So do I picture getting out of that distress? Because the answer might be no. Every time I feel distress, I feel like it's going to last forever. Then that's understanding that's your answer to will distress be alleviated is a hard no. And it's often related to the first one of nobody's available to me. There's nobody to help me. I'm on my own. I don't know what to do. This is never going to go away. Or when you get distressed, is the first thing you do, go and find somebody. And like, I need to talk about it. I need comfort. I need to figure, like, I need another person. And if so, then that's probably more of that, like maybe distress is alleviated if there is someone who can help me. Or is I'm in distress. I need to fix this. I will move into action to take care of this. And that's going to be more of that. And so just noticing those things for that one. And then the third one is what do I use my agency for? Like we all have power and agency. We don't all feel like we have agency, but we all do. And so asking the question, okay, assuming I do have agency, what am I doing with that agency? Like, how am I spending my energy? And if I'm spending all of my energy making sure my people are okay and feeling like I have to do things in response to what's going on around me, then that's very much I'm using my agency to keep my people around and make sure that everything's going to be okay with my relationships, versus I'm using my agency to make sure that I never need anything from anybody and I never get too close. I never depend on anybody. Nobody ever expects too much from me. And those are good indicators for I have some real insecurity in my attachments if those are the ways that I'm functioning. Because in a secure attachment, you can do either of those things. You can use your agency to make sure people are okay, but it's not a compulsion that you always have to satisfy. And you can do things to make sure that people have realistic expectations of you, but it's not like a danger or like a threat if somebody expects something from you. And then in the same way with using the will this distress be alleviated, it's sometimes you do go to people because you do need people to help really alleviate distress. Sometimes you do need to figure it out yourself. And so you have access to both of those. And so that's really the marker of secure attachment is I have multiple strategies, multiple tools, and I can access the right ones that are needed in the situation that I'm in, which is insecurity is I have a handful of things and those are the only things I've got. And I use them all the time, even when they hurt me, even when they're not good for the situation, it's all I've got. And so those would be ways to become more aware of the particular texture and flavor of your particular insecurity.
That's powerful. And I think too, pairing that with I can do either way, and it's all anchored in a relationship with an all-loving, ever-present God.
Who is already attached to us. Like we don't have to worry, like he's already attached to us. We are already his children. We are already the dearly loved ones that he is attuned to. And so we don't ever have to wonder if we reach out for attachment to him, will he be willing to attach with us because he's already attached to us.
Anything else that you'd want to say in closing? Just anything that's on your heart that you think is important for everyone to know?
I think primarily just that no matter how you feel about God, God is absolutely like available and delighted in who you are and is so glad to be with you and wants to be with you no matter where you find yourself.
Hey there, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to this episode with Cyd Holsclaw. And if you wanted to check out some of the things that her and her husband are offering, then go to the description in the link below. And if you want to also join in on the free community that I have where we got a bunch of people coming together learning how to listen to God on a daily basis, then join the Receive Academy. I will have a link in the description below for that as well. God bless every single one of you. I hope that you are learning all about how you can strengthen your relationship to God through all these conversations and through everything that I'm creating. If you do have questions, you can always feel free to reach out to me. Somehow, there's a way. You can email me. Actually, just go to the go to the community. If you go to the community, then you can reach out to me. You can send me a private message, and I'd love to answer you there. Any questions that you have. There's not been a single person that I have not been able to support and help to be able to hear and listen from God and know that it's from Him. So I can confidently say that. I've been doing this for a while, and I just can't wait to connect with you. All right. Have a good one. We'll talk to you later.